Hello and welcome to our channel. We are so happy to have you here with us. If you're looking to improve your English speaking skills and gain more confidence, you've come to the right place. Whether you're just starting out or already at an intermediate level, we're here to guide you with practical tips, fun lessons, and real-life examples to help you speak English like a pro.
Hello, everyone. How's it going? I hope you're doing great wherever you are. I'm Agnes, and I want to extend a huge warm welcome to you all for tuning into our podcast today. It's so exciting to have you here. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just relaxing, we're glad you chose to spend this time with us. Thank you for that. Hello, everyone. How's it going? I hope you're doing great wherever you are. I'm Agnes, and I want to extend a huge warm welcome to you all for tuning into our podcast today. It's so exciting to have you here. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just relaxing, we're glad you chose to spend this time with us. Thank you for that.
Hey, it's Jasper here, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this exciting discussion. Agnes is absolutely right. This topic is incredibly useful for anyone who is learning English. You know, making good first impressions is something we all want to do, right? And how do we make a great first impression? Well, it starts with how we introduce ourselves.
That's right, Jasper. So, what exactly are we talking about today? We're talking about the different ways we introduce ourselves to people, but what makes it really interesting is that we're looking at two types of situations, formal and informal introductions.
Exactly. Formal introductions think of meeting someone important, like a new boss, or maybe at a business event, or even a special family gathering. Then we have informal introductions, like when you meet a new friend at school, or just run into someone at the park. The way you introduce yourself can change depending on the situation, and we're going to break that down today.
Yes, it's something a lot of English learners struggle with because English can be tricky when it comes to formal versus informal language, right? But don't worry, we'll make it simple for you. And I think it's so important because introductions help us connect with others. Imagine if you didn't know how to introduce yourself well, it could make situations awkward or even uncomfortable.
Exactly, Agnes. Knowing how to introduce yourself, no matter the situation, shows confidence. And that's something we all want, right? Confidence in using a new language is key. So today, we're going to help you master those introductions whether you're in a formal setting, like a job interview, or an informal setting with your friends.
And the best part is, this topic is useful not only for English learners, but for everyone, no matter your level. It doesn't matter if you're just starting to learn English or you're already at an intermediate level, we've got you covered. Plus, it's going to be fun. So, I really hope that by the end of today's conversation, you feel more confident and ready to meet new people in any situation.
I couldn't agree more, Agnes, so let's get started. We're going to dive right into the first part of our topic today, formal introductions. Now, imagine you're at a business meeting or at a dinner where you don't know anyone. How would you introduce yourself in such a situation? What would you say to make a good impression?
Great question, Jasper. When you're meeting someone in a formal setting, the key is to be polite and respectful. You want to show that you're serious, but also friendly. For example, you could say something like, "Hello, my name is Agnes. Nice to meet you." Or, if you want to be even more formal, you could say, "Good afternoon. My name is Agnes. It's a pleasure to meet you."
Oh, yes, that's a perfect example. I think one of the most important things to remember when you're doing a formal introduction is to make sure you speak clearly and slowly. You want the other person to understand you, and you don't want to rush through it. It also helps to smile. A smile makes you sound more friendly and approachable, which is always a good thing.
That's a good point, Jasper. And speaking of smiles, don't forget to shake hands in formal situations. In many cultures, a firm handshake is a sign of confidence and professionalism. But of course, This may vary depending on the culture you're in, so always be aware of the local customs.
Right. And while we're on the topic of handshakes, let's talk about eye contact. In formal settings, making eye contact is really important. It shows that you're engaged and interested in the conversation. But don't stare too long, just a friendly, brief connection with their eyes will do.
Exactly, Jasper. So to summarize formal introductions, you'll want to introduce yourself with your full name, be polite, smile, speak clearly, and make eye contact. And if you're in a really formal setting, a handshake is always a good touch.
I love that summary, and don't forget, first impressions are really important. So make sure to be yourself and stay confident, even if you're nervous.
Right, Jasper? So, we've talked about formal introductions, but what about informal ones? Let's switch gears a little.
Now this is where things get interesting, right? When you're meeting people in a more casual setting, like at a party, with friends, or even in a classroom, you can relax a bit more. You can use a friendly tone and don't have to be as stiff or formal. For example, instead of saying good afternoon, it's a pleasure to meet you, you can say something like, hey, I'm Jasper. It's great to meet you, and that's it, short and sweet.
Exactly. In informal situations, you don't have to worry too much about using titles like Mr. or Ms., and you can just call someone by their first name. It's much more relaxed, and it helps to build a connection faster.
And you can also add something fun to your introduction to make it more memorable. For example, hi, I'm Jasper. I'm really into photography and I love traveling. What about you? This gives the other person something to respond to, and it helps the conversation flow naturally.
I love that, Jasper. When you add a little bit about yourself, it makes you seem more approachable and friendly. Plus, it gives the other person a chance to share a little about themselves too, which is how real conversations start.
Exactly. And don't worry if you're still learning English, introductions like these can be simple and fun. The key is to be friendly, confident, and not too stressed about using perfect grammar. It's about making a connection.
So, to sum up informal introductions, keep it short, friendly, and relaxed. Use your first name, and don't forget to add a little personal touch to make it more engaging.
And remember, it's all about starting a conversation. A great introduction is just the beginning.
And before we wrap up part 1, I just want to say thank you to all of you who are listening to this podcast. We really appreciate you being here with us, learning and improving your English skills.
Absolutely. We can't wait to continue our conversation with you. Stick with us as we explore even more ways to make those introductions shine.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us. We're so happy that you're here, learning with us, and hopefully feeling more confident about making introductions, whether formal or informal. Jasper gave some amazing tips in part 1, especially on how to handle informal introductions. We've already talked about what makes a formal introduction different from an informal one, and now let's dive even deeper into the heart of making great introductions, specifically how to keep the conversation going after you've introduced yourself. Because let's face it, an introduction is just the beginning of building a connection.
Absolutely, Agnes. We all know that introductions are important, but after that first hi, my name is moment, what happens next? It's the conversation that really counts. And it can sometimes be tricky to keep the flow going, especially when you're learning a new language. So, what we want to focus on today is how to smoothly transition from that introduction to a friendly, interesting conversation that feels natural.
That's such a great point, Jasper. You know, when you meet someone new, whether in a formal or informal setting, sometimes it can feel a bit awkward if you don't know how to keep talking. But here's the thing, don't stress. There are plenty of easy ways to make the conversation flow naturally, and it's all about asking the right questions and being genuinely interested in the other person. Let's start with the informal situations, since those are usually a little more relaxed.
Right, informal situations are the perfect chance to practice. So, after your introduction, you can ask some simple but meaningful questions to learn more about the person. For example, after saying, "Hi, I'm Jasper, nice to meet you," you might say something like, "So, what do you like to do for fun?" Or "What kind of music do you listen to?" These questions aren't too formal, but they still help you learn about the other person and keep the conversation going.
Exactly, Jasper. You know, asking questions about hobbies or interests is always a good way to keep things going. People love talking about their passions. You might ask, "Do you enjoy reading? What's the last book you read?" Or, "Are you into sports? Which one do you play?" The key is to keep the conversation light and easy, especially in informal settings where people want to feel comfortable.
Right, and don't forget to listen carefully. Active listening is just as important as asking good questions. When someone answers, make sure to respond thoughtfully. For example, if someone says, "I love photography," you might say, "Oh, that's awesome. I've always wanted to try that. What kind of photos do you take?" That shows you're interested in what they're saying, and it encourages them to talk more.
Such a great point, Jasper. Active listening is key to making any conversation feel natural and enjoyable. You don't need to be perfect with your grammar or vocabulary. What matters is that you're showing genuine interest. And don't forget to share a little bit about yourself, too. Conversations are a two-way street. If someone asks about your hobbies, don't be afraid to tell them about your interests. For example, "I love cooking, especially trying new recipes." This can make the conversation more interesting and balanced.
Yes, and when you're having these casual, informal conversations, it's important to show your personality. Be yourself. If you love animals, you can talk about your pets. If you enjoy traveling, share some of your favorite places. When you add a bit of your own personality into the conversation, it makes everything feel more real and engaging.
Exactly, Jasper. Now, let's move on to something really important in any conversation: body language. It's not just about what you say, but also how you say it. In informal situations, relaxed body language can help the other person feel more at ease. When you smile, make eye contact, and use open gestures, you come across as warm and welcoming. Just be careful not to cross your arms or look distracted, because that could send the wrong message.
Absolutely, Agnes. Nonverbal communication can say a lot. I think it's so important to be aware of your body language. Even when you're learning English and not sure about the words to say, your smile and your friendly gestures can make a big difference. People will feel that positive energy.
That's so true. And remember, body language in informal situations is generally more relaxed, but in formal situations, you'll want to be a bit more controlled. In formal settings, you might sit up straight, avoid too many hand gestures, and maintain a polite but confident posture. You want to show respect and professionalism without being too stiff.
Great point, Agnes. Now, let's talk a little bit about formal introductions and how to carry on the conversation in those situations. Formal conversations often happen in business settings, during interviews, or at events like conferences. So, what do you do after that first, "Nice to meet you, I'm Jasper"?
Well, in formal situations, you still want to keep things polite and respectful, but you can also ask questions to keep the conversation going. Instead of asking about hobbies or personal interests right away, you might ask more professional questions. For example, "What does your company do?" Or "How did you get involved in this industry?" These questions show that you're interested in the person's work or background, which is especially important in business settings.
Exactly, Agnes. And another thing to remember in formal situations is to keep your questions open-ended. Instead of asking, "Did you have a good weekend?" which could lead to a simple yes or no answer, try asking something like, "What did you do this weekend?" Or "How has your week been so far?" These types of questions encourage longer answers and help keep the conversation flowing smoothly.
And, of course, remember to show interest in the answers. If someone says, I had a busy weekend, but I spent some time with my family, you could respond by saying, that sounds nice. What did you all do together? Again, you're showing interest in their response, which helps the conversation stay warm and engaging.
Yes, showing genuine interest is key in both formal and informal settings. And let's not forget the importance of politeness in formal situations. You want to make sure you're not interrupting or asking overly personal questions too quickly. It's also a good idea to use phrases like, I see, that's interesting, or how fascinating. These phrases show that you're paying attention and help you sound polite.
Right, Jasper? So, to wrap up part 2, we've talked about how to introduce yourself and keep the conversation going in both informal and formal situations. Whether you're at a party or in a business meeting, always remember to listen, ask thoughtful questions, and be yourself. And as always, don't worry about making mistakes. The most important thing is that you're connecting with others and practicing your English.
And thank you so much for sticking with us and listening to all these tips. You're doing amazing, and we're so proud of your progress. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Jasper and I are so happy to have you here as we dive deeper into the world of introductions. You've already learned so much, and I hope you're feeling more confident about introducing yourself in both formal and informal situations. In the last part, we covered how to ask great questions and keep a conversation flowing. Now, let's continue building on those skills and explore a few more important aspects of introductions, especially when it comes to cultural differences and how to adjust your approach depending on the context.
Yes, Agnes, this is going to be really interesting. As you continue to improve your English, it's important to remember that introductions don't always look the same in every country or culture. What might be considered polite or appropriate in one place can be very different in another. So, if you're traveling, working, or meeting people from different cultures, it's crucial to be aware of these differences, especially when it comes to formal versus informal situations.
That's such a great point, Jasper. For example, in some countries, when you meet someone formally for the first time, you might bow or give a small nod instead of shaking hands. In other countries, a kiss on the cheek or a hug could be the norm, even when meeting for the first time. It can get a little tricky, but if you're aware of these cultural practices, you'll feel much more confident in making the right impression.
Right, in many places around the world, the handshake is still the most common formal greeting. But, did you know that in some countries, a firm handshake is considered too strong, and a soft handshake is more respectful? For instance, in Japan, you might find that people bow to greet each other rather than shaking hands at all. The key is to observe and adapt. If you're unsure about what's expected, a good tip is to follow the other person's lead. If they extend their hand for a handshake, you do the same. If they bow, you bow. It shows respect and that you're paying attention to their customs.
Exactly, Jasper. And let's not forget that the way people introduce themselves can also differ based on the culture. In some places, it's common to introduce yourself with your full name, like, hello, my name is Agnes Brown, while in other places, you might just say, hi, I'm Agnes, or even just Agnes. Some cultures are much more casual, while others are a little more formal.
That's so true, Agnes, and the way you speak also matters. For example, in formal situations, you might be expected to use polite language and titles like Mr., Ms., or Doctor to show respect. But in informal situations, you could just use first names, or even nicknames if that's how people are addressing each other. This can vary depending on the country, so it's always helpful to learn about the specific customs of the culture you're in.
Right? So when you're speaking in English, keep in mind that it's important to be polite and use proper language when you're in a formal situation and more relaxed when you're in an informal situation. But the real key is to adapt, pay attention to how others are speaking and introducing themselves, and follow along with that. Don't be afraid to ask questions. 2, If you're in a new place and unsure about the cultural norms, just ask someone how they usually greet people. Most people will be happy to help.
Exactly, and along with adjusting the way you introduce yourself, it's also important to remember personal space. In some countries, people stand close to each other when talking, while in others, people prefer more personal space. This can affect how you approach someone during a formal or informal introduction. If someone steps back a little, don't take it personally, they might just need more space. But if they lean in or stand closer, that's their way of showing they feel comfortable with you. Again, this is something you can usually pick up on as you observe.
Great point, Jasper. Personal space is so important to consider. And while we're talking about these cultural differences, let's also touch on eye contact. It's another thing that can vary widely from culture to culture. In many Western cultures, making eye contact during an introduction is a sign of confidence and sincerity. But in some Asian cultures, too much eye contact can be seen as rude or too aggressive, especially when speaking with someone older or in a position of authority. Again, this comes down to being mindful of cultural norms.
That's right, so here's a tip. If you're meeting someone for the first time and you're unsure about how much eye contact is appropriate, start with just a quick glance. As the conversation goes on, you'll get a better sense of how much eye contact is comfortable for the other person. And remember, being polite and respectful is universal.
Exactly, Jasper. And just to add a little more to our cultural exploration, let's talk about introductions in a professional or business setting. In formal situations, especially in a business meeting or interview, it's important to remember that people often value professionalism and respect above all else. So, when you introduce yourself in these situations, you want to make sure that your greeting is clear, confident, and respectful. For example, in many business environments, you would introduce yourself by saying, "Good morning, I'm Agnes Brown, and I'm very pleased to meet you." Adding a simple phrase like, "Pleased to meet you," shows respect for the other person.
Great advice, Agnes. And let's not forget that in some formal situations, particularly in global business settings, it's important to also mention your position or role. You could say something like, "Hello, my name is Agnes Brown, and I'm the marketing director at XYZ company." This way, the person you're meeting has a clear idea of who you are and how you're connected to the conversation. It's all about making the other person feel comfortable and helping them understand your professional background.
Right? And this is another area where cultural differences can play a big role. For example, in some countries, introducing your job title is really important because it helps the other person understand your status or position. But in other cultures, your position may not be as relevant, and it's more important to simply build a personal connection first. So, once again, pay attention to the environment you're in and adjust accordingly.
Exactly, and it's also worth mentioning that formal introductions in some cultures might involve a little bit of small talk before you get down to business. You might chat for a few minutes about something unrelated to work, like the weather or current events, just to establish a connection. In some cultures, this small talk is very important, while in others, people prefer to get straight to the point. So, it's great to know what's expected in the place you're visiting or working.
That's a great point, Jasper. Small talk can really help break the ice and make the conversation feel more comfortable. Whether it's discussing the weather or asking about someone's travel experience, small talk is a great way to start a conversation, even in formal settings. But remember, keep it light and positive.
Exactly, and as we wrap up part 3, I want to remind you that no matter where you are or who you're meeting, the most important thing is to be respectful and adaptable. Whether you're in a formal or informal situation, taking the time to pay attention to the cultural cues and adjusting your approach will always make a good impression.
Absolutely, Jasper. So, no matter where you're meeting someone or what the situation is, with a little awareness of the cultural differences and the right attitude, you'll be able to confidently introduce yourself and have great conversations. Thank you so much for sticking with us through all these tips. Keep practicing, and we'll be back soon with even more advice to help you improve your English skills.